Billy Edwards is now predicted to go to Wisconsin.
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your day. I'm also doing work at InsideBlackandGold.net, so make sure you guys head over to Inside Black and Gold for all your latest Terps news. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Maryland football. Billy Edwards, former Maryland quarterback at this point, it looks like, is now predicted to go to Wisconsin football. Is projected to go the Badgers now. On3 actually just switched their prediction for Billy Edwards, which I think is interesting. The story just came out. On3 just did this switch in prediction. If you guys know, I talked about him going to Michigan on Friday, and the video did pretty well. A lot of Michigan fans were really curious about Billy Edwards and had a lot to say after I talked about Billy Edwards going to Michigan. I'm going to go ahead and say it. I think Wisconsin's a better fit for Billy Edwards. I think I'll get into that a little bit, why I think he's a better fit over at Wisconsin rather than going over to Michigan. But I think it's still, when we look at it from the Maryland perspective, make sure we draw it back to the Terps perspective. It still kind of definitely hurts that Billy Edwards is going to Wisconsin. I'm going to continue to say losing Billy Edwards hurts, but it doesn't kill us. It's like an injury you sustained, but you can keep going. It's not a season-ending injury. It's not a injury where you're going to miss 5 weeks or something like that. But it hurts the Terps a little bit. You might miss a game or two. It hurts a little bit in game performance. I just think losing Billy Edwards, especially to a Big Ten team, it hurts because I think we wanted to have an experienced quarterback, or I know Mike Locksley wanted to have an experienced quarterback in that room before Malik Washington got here. And I know 4-star Malik Washington's the future of the program, and I know he's going to be a top-end player, and I know he has all this talent, and he has a chance to be really, really good. But still, that's not a guy you want to lose. And the fact that now there's a lot of pressure on Malik Washington, unless Maryland's going to pick up another quarterback to come in and play right away behind an offensive line that was horrible last year for the Terps. I think the worst in the Big Ten last year for Maryland. I don't know about Purdue's offensive line. Purdue was awful last year. They were horrible. They were the worst team in the Big Ten. I don't know about their offensive line, but Maryland's offensive line definitely had a case to be made to be the worst offensive line in the Big Ten. And when you put a freshman behind that line, that's scary. And we'll see what we do in the portal. We've extended some offers. We're trying to get some guys. We're bringing Jalen Gilchrist, guys like Terez Davis, Ryan Howerton, Michael Hershey. A lot of those guys get another year and should progress. We have some talent up and coming in that line, but still, it's still scary hours behind that offensive line for Maryland football. It's not a bunch of solidified NFL guys back there, and I think that's scary when you're talking about Malik Washington. So I do think that Maryland still wanted to keep Billy Edwards, and I know he's in the portal, but a part of me still kind of feels like there's a small chance he ends up going back. Now, talk about the Wisconsin thing. So this is interesting. Switching from Michigan to Wisconsin, he technically didn't switch his commitment. We never really knew exactly what was going on, but these On3 or these 247, these predictions mean something. Like, these guys have a lot of insider takes, because usually when they make a prediction, those guys are right, and they want to be right, because when they're wrong, that lessens their pedigree when making these decisions. But usually these guys have a pretty good record when making these predictions. So the Michigan thing was real for a while. It was clearly real. I just think Wisconsin's a better fit. I didn't get the Michigan thing. I didn't. I just thought that Billy Edwards in that spotlight for Michigan football after the down year that they had at quarterback, with pretty poor quarterback play, pretty bad, among the worst, if not the worst, in the Big Ten last year. You could have put a solid Big Ten quarterback on that Michigan team last year. I think they're potentially a playoff team, potentially. But the fact that Billy Edwards was predicted to go there, I just it didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I got it from Billy Edwards' perspective, and I said, if Michigan's offering you $1 million, then go, because I don't know what your NFL future looks like. I don't know what you're doing in the future. I don't know exactly what happens in terms of all those different things. He's not a guaranteed NFL guy. Like, that's not what Billy Edwards is. So if Michigan's offering you $1 million, I get that. But I still didn't think it was the right fit. I thought the money made sense, but I didn't think anything else made sense, because I thought Edwards in that spotlight in Michigan football after the down year that they had at quarterback, that would be a whole lot of pressure for Edwards to live up to potentially what J.J. McCarthy has been, what other guys have been behind that Michigan team. Like, that's all. There's a ton of expectations. When you go to a place like Michigan, it's expectations. They expect their quarterback play to be better, a lot better than it was last year. And sure, the Michigan fans argued he's going to have a better offensive line, which is true. He's going to have a better run game, which is true. He's going to have a better defense, which is true. But still, that doesn't mean he's a good enough quarterback where he is going to succeed under the spotlight at a place like Michigan. And I'm not saying he wasn't going to be good, but I just don't think that it made sense for him to be in that type of spotlight, to jump from Maryland, where it's like one thing if a guy dominates at a place like Maryland. Like, remember Sam Hartman's at Wake Forest, and then he jumps up to Notre Dame because he was absolutely dominant at Wake Forest, and it was clear they needed to get him somewhere else. But Billy Edwards didn't have that type of year. It's an up and down year, and I just think Wisconsin makes a lot more sense. And then, as well as they're bringing in the number one recruit in the nation and this Bryce Underwood kid, they say this kid's going to be the next huge thing, going to Michigan. And I just think, could Billy Edwards hold this kid off? I don't know. The Michigan fans seem convinced that Bryce Underwood's going to sit here, but I don't know. I don't know if he could hold this kid off. I honestly doubt he could. They're going to watch Bryce Underwood in practice next year and be like, yeah, he probably has to be our starter. He is everything. He's the number one recruit in the nation, number one QB, just number one everything. Insanely talented. They call him a potential franchise signal caller with the ideal blend of size, arm talent, and athleticism. So I thought this kid could probably come in and take Edwards' job. If Edwards was predicted to be the starter early on, he could quickly go to Bryce Underwood. And that's why also I think that Wisconsin's the better fit, because as soon as Billy Edwards has a bad game, as soon as Billy Edwards has a bad throw, all the fans are going to be screaming, Bryce Underwood, Bryce Underwood. The national media, get Bryce Underwood in there for Michigan. Everyone's going to be saying that, I promise, as soon as Billy Edwards, and he's not a perfect quarterback. He's due to have a bad game. He's due to have a couple of bad performances. And I just don't think under that spotlight it would make sense. I think Wisconsin works. I think that makes sense. I mean, I would argue he's, one more year of eligibility? I would say if you're going to Wisconsin at that point, just stay at Maryland. I still think that Maryland has an argument. If you're not going to go to Michigan and get the $1 million, then I don't know what Wisconsin's offering you in terms of NIL. I don't know what they're saying, but I just think that Maryland and Wisconsin, they match up respectively. You know the Maryland system. You're comfortable at Maryland, and you'll probably be the starter next year for at least a little bit, unless you start performing bad. Then we'll probably end up going to Blake Washington. But I think Wisconsin's a very similar situation as Maryland is. They definitely had a better year than we had last year, but Wisconsin actually just landed a commitment from a San Diego transfer quarterback, Danny O'Neal. So that is something that's interesting. But I guess Wisconsin's vision is that Billy Edwards starts for the year, and then they go to this Danny O'Neal guy for the next couple of years, because he was only a freshman last year for San Diego State, started as a freshman at San Diego State. So I think that's kind of how Wisconsin sees it. They see Billy Edwards as a starter, and I think it makes more sense. there's a little bit less pressure. Of course, Wisconsin's a big football fan base. Those guys care. There's still going to be pressure, and pressure is good. But playing at Wisconsin versus playing at Michigan is a different type of environment, a different type of pressure from the national media. There's a different type of expectation from the fans and everybody surrounding that program where you are supposed to be a playoff team. You're supposed to be really good. And I think that I'm not saying he's going to cripple under that pressure, but I just don't know if he's that type of player. I don't know, quite frankly, I don't know if he's good enough for that Michigan type of pressure. And I think Wisconsin's a good fit. It's a Big Ten team. I'm pretty sure Maryland plays them next year, actually, which is interesting. If we end up playing Billy Edwards, I think that's something that could be really, really interesting, to be honest. But I just think it's a little bit of a better fit. Yeah, we play Wisconsin, first Big Ten game of the season. So if that ends up happening, that's going to be really, really intriguing and really interesting. I just think it makes sense. There's not the number one recruit in the nation, one of the most talented quarterbacks ever, and this kid that got paid $13 million or whatever the case is at Michigan to go play quarterback behind you, just eating at your ankles. You don't have that. I think there's a little bit less, there's a little bit more freedom. I think you can play a little bit more mistake-free or more confident football, not mistake-free, but he's not going to be worried about making mistakes is kind of my point. And I just think it's the better fit overall over there, Wisconsin football. I think it fits him better. I think it makes more sense for him rather than going to a place like Michigan where if he plays bad, if he doesn't play good, things will get exemplified and everyone's going to be like, even the crowd could be start chanting, we want Bryce Underwood. It's like, remember Spencer Rattler and Caleb Williams? It could be that type of thing. And he's not the type of talent that even Spencer Rattler is. So I just think that it's better for him to go to Wisconsin. And it looks like that's what's actually going to happen. Maryland football, how many wins? What's our ceiling next year in terms of the amount of wins? I think it's pretty high. Talk about that next. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sports app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get the hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out latest stats, view live play-by-plays, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. There's so many different things to bet on FanDuel right now, whether it's the NFL, there's a Monday Night Football doubleheader. If you want to bet on that, you can go over there. There's college basketball games every weekday and weekend. There's a college football playoff coming up this weekend. There's so many different things on FanDuel. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So I talked about how easy our schedule was next year, and I think that we can be put together a really good year. But what exactly is our ceiling as a team next year? Because I think it's pretty high in terms of the amount of wins we get. Let's be honest. The next year's schedule is easy. We struck gold with the schedule next year. It's very beneficial to what we have as a football program and where we're at. And I think it gives us a chance to get right back on track. And somebody actually texted me that they wanted me to do this segment. So that's the reason I'm doing it. So feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram. If you guys have things you want to talk about, if you have things you want me to address, I'm more than happy to do that. So just let me know on Instagram, Twitter. I know a lot of you guys follow me on any of those types of things. Just let me know, and I'm happy to talk about it with you guys. So what is the actual ceiling for this team? How many wins can they get to? And it's hard to say this, but besides maybe Michigan, and I don't know what Michigan's going to do this year in the portal and who they're going to get at quarterback, besides maybe Michigan, every game is winnable. And that's a really cool thing for Maryland football. I don't want to say this, Mike Locksley talks about winning Big Ten championships, right? And potentially making a Big Ten championship and all these different things. And we're not there as a program. Like, I'm not saying we're going undefeated. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that this team, if they put together the right type of talent in the portal and we are maybe able to add a better offensive line, get some of the things straightened up, and put together a decent roster, there's no reason we can't get back to 8 wins. There's no reason that we can't get to 9 wins. This schedule is more than favorable. There's not a single game on the schedule that's not winnable. So when you ask what our ceiling is, how good can we potentially be? And remember, this is ceiling. This is not how good I think we're going to be. The ceiling for our team is really high. I want to say 10 wins. I do. I think that's the ceiling. If Malik Washington ends up coming in and is the guy we think he can be, if some of the receivers figure it out, if the offensive line is better this year, which I think it should be better next year. We get a lot of guys back, and we have a chance to add guys in the portal, and we have younger guys coming up that should be better. Like, the offensive line should be much better next year. The defense, we'll see. But the ceiling is really 10 wins. And that gives you leeway of losing 2 games that maybe you shouldn't. Maybe the ceiling is closer to 9 realistically, to give you a more realistic view. But I do think when you talk about ceiling, how good can you possibly be? What's the maximum height you can reach? I really do believe the ceiling's 9, 10 wins. Now the floor is probably like 5 wins. But I do think that the ceiling's 9, 10 wins. If you look at schedules, there's not a single game on here that you're like, oh, besides maybe Michigan, depending on how they look like, especially at the quarterback spot. But Michigan loses some talented guys next year to the NFL, whether it's the Mason Graham kid, defensive lineman, Will Johnson, corner. They lose some talented players. But when you look at the Maryland schedule in terms of the ceiling, FAU, you would say that's a win. That's 1 win. Northern Illinois, you would say that's a win. That's 2 wins, unless maybe you're Notre Dame. Towson, that's 3 wins. Those are 3-0 right there. That's 3 easy wins to start the schedule. And then you have Wisconsin on September 20th. That could be really interesting with the Billy Edwards news and all the different things surrounding Billy Edwards. The Wisconsin game could now become a really interesting type of game. If you're playing Billy Edwards in your first Big Ten game, I think that's something that would be a huge storyline. But I think Wisconsin is another game. I don't see why you couldn't win that. That's 4 wins. Washington next week at home, or at home. That's 5 wins to me. You could win that game potentially. I'm not saying we will win these games, but I think there's a good shot that we would have. Nebraska, that's 6 wins. I think Nebraska should be pretty good next year, but I think that's another win. UCLA, that's 7. Indiana, Indiana's in the playoff right now, so maybe I'll say no to that. Rutgers potentially could win that, which is 8. Illinois, 9. Michigan State in the last week, 10. Michigan, probably not. Like, do you guys not see a ceiling around 8 or 9, 10, 8 wins? I think that we should be a 7-win, 6-win team at least. Realistically, we're not so much better. We're not just better than everybody right now, so we probably would end up losing probably a couple of these. But I just think when you look at it, when you take out the 3 automatic losses, you have such a bigger ceiling. You have a lot more potential in what you are able to do, which I think is important for Maryland football. Preston Howard enters the transfer portal. What does this mean? It's that time of year. The college football playoff is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting, high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern. Leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist School University, SMU, better known as, battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. So Preston Howard has elected to enter the transfer portal, and I think this is a move that is interesting. I think it makes sense a little bit for Preston Howard, just because I think he kind of got passed up this year a little bit by Dylan Wade and what Dylan Wade can do as a receiver. I think Preston Howard had a year that was kind of down from what we kind of expected. I thought going into the year, I said it. These tight ends are going to be boom or bust. I thought they had a really high ceiling. I thought Preston Howard's 6'6" frame and what he can be as a tight end had a really high ceiling. He had 24 receptions, 189 yards this year. I thought he had a really high ceiling to do a lot more than that. And it just didn't end up happening this year. He dealt with some injuries. Dylan Wade was also kind of right with him in terms of tight end 1A and tight end 1B. And eventually it felt like Dylan Wade kind of passed him a little bit. And so Preston's now in the portal. I think it definitely hurts, though, our team right now, because I think he's a guy, Preston, that still has a couple of years of eligibility left. And so him leaving definitely isn't the best thing, because I think, yeah, he might not have had the year or the jump that we thought he could have as the starter. But the fact of the matter is he still has a couple of years to get better, and he still has all those traits and athleticism to reach a really high level of play. I just think he needed a little bit more time, and another year potentially could really help for Preston Howard. But the fact that he had 13 receptions in 2023 for 160 yards, and 2024, where we expected him to be the starter, only 24 receptions, 189 yards. Yes, he was hurt a lot. Yes, there was different things, but it was definitely not the type of year that we wanted him to have. It seemed like every week he'd have like 2 receptions for like 15 yards. Like, you can go down the list. Against Penn State, 2 receptions, 12 yards. Iowa, 2 receptions, 12 yards. Rutgers, 3 receptions, 15 yards. Oregon, 2 receptions, 22 yards. Minnesota, 2 receptions, 16 yards. Like, it was always about 2 receptions, 15 yards, somewhere around that. And I think that kind of is not exactly what we wanted from him. We wanted a bigger role, and there wasn't a ton of huge games. Whereas Dylan Wade, it'd be a similar thing, but then there'd be a couple of games where we see Dylan Wade go off, like Rutgers, 7 receptions for 92 yards for Dylan Wade, or he would have bigger plays, and Dylan Wade ended up having 374 yards on 29 receptions. Just a little bit more assertive in the passing game, a little bit better of a receiving threat that you just don't always get. And I think now when I look at it, that tight end room is kind of starting to empty out now without Preston Howard. Husband's entered the portal. So there's definitely space for us to add someone. And we were looking at that Iowa freshman that I talked about on Friday that entered the portal, potentially getting him. But I think that's an ad that you really want. And now you look at him and you say, we just lost Howard. You could potentially be one of our 2 tight ends, because I don't see a ton of young guys behind Preston and Dylan Wade that I feel good about being the next tight end for Maryland football. So the fact that Preston Howard entered the portal definitely hurts, but I think Mike Locksley has got to get in the portal himself and add some talent in that room, because now that's another weak spot. I'm telling you, this roster has a lot of holes right now. We have a lot of spaces where we could potentially add people. We'll see what Mike Locksley does with it. We'll see how many guys he decides to add. We'll see what he does in the portal, but I just think there's a lot of different space to add different guys, to get new guys at different positions, and I think Mike Locksley should do it. And I think we need a lot of help on this roster to get better and to do some things. So we'll see how that goes. But I think Preston Howard entering the portal definitely sucks, because I thought he still had a couple of years left to prove that how good he could be. He was only redshirt sophomore, so he still had 2 years after this to do some things. And I thought he had a chance and a high ceiling to be a high-level type of player. But he's just going to be gone. I heard Ole Miss was potentially in on him, but we'll see. I really don't know. So we'll see what happens with Preston. That could be interesting. If a down year at Maryland leads you to Ole Miss, They definitely have dudes over there, though, so it's not easy to play at a place like that. But, Ole Miss is a good program, so if he got to go there, that'd be pretty cool too. That's all we have for today. Thank you for listening to Locked on Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're here every day talking Maryland football and basketball. So thank you for listening to Locked on Terps.